Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to tonight's Cabinet meeting. Item 1 on the agenda. Do we have any apologies, please? Any other apologies? Councillor Eldred as well.
Councillor Graves and Councillor Anderson.
Okay, good, thank you. He'll be here shortly, I think. Any late items? I don't have any late items. Receipts of petitions? No petitions as far as I know. Identification of urgent items to which call-in will not apply. There are none. Declarations of interest, please. Anything on the agenda? In respect, Olu, of the schools grant funding thing, we have I know one of our members is a school governor. Is there any relevance in terms of declarations of interest?
It's non-pecuniary, I'd say. Non-pecuniary. So.
Non-pecuniary, so no, thank you. Just for clarity. Okay, so minutes of the meeting held on the 17th of July. Can I have a proposer, please? Councillor Webb. Councillor Barker seconded. Thank you very much. Item 7 then is the recommendations from exec scrutiny last night, of which there are 3, I think. But if it's okay, I'll do the normal with this and deal with each item as we go along and introduce the recommendations in the course of each item. Is everybody okay with that? So, item 8 then is a statement of common ground. Who's going to do this one?
Me too. You can do, I can.
Thank you, Werner.
Sorry, that's very technical. This is a technical item, Chair. The Statement of Common Ground is a new requirement under the National Planning Policy Framework for all local planning authorities. So it's something we have to do. So the paper in front of you is to not seek that we do it, but to approve a way of approve an approval process, put my teeth in. So what it proposes is that decisions are made with the appropriate strategic director in consultation with the appropriate joint advisory board or committee member. And if I can just explain those two bodies to you. The joint advisory board is with our housing market area, so that's with Amber Valley and South Derbyshire District Council. The Joint Advisory Committee is a longer-standing body, but that's just between Derby and Derbyshire, so that's looking at the minerals and the waste local plans in particular. So to manage these statements of common ground, which we have to prepare, then what we're asking for, Chair, is that they're approved by the Strategic Director in consultation with the member who is on either of those two bodies, as relevant to the thing we're agreeing, the Cabinet portfolio holder, and then where there are specific financial implications, that the Strategic Director for Corporate Resources also has to be approved. And obviously, if it's very significant, then we would raise that to Cabinet. But these it's something we have to do, and it was something that will be we can go into inspection with, so that we're fulfilling our duty to include and involve. So I'm assuming members have read, and if there are any technical questions, but that duty to cooperate is something that we need to demonstrate. The Statement of Common Ground is an organic document that will move across the key issues, and as it states in the report, a clear example of that is where we have cross-boundary issues, maybe with where one of our neighbouring authorities takes some of our local housing allocation.
Okay, thank you for that. I'll deal with the exec scrutiny side of things first. They have made a brief recommendation in relation to this. They recommend that the Executive Scrutiny Board resolved to request that specific arrangements for the transfer of Section 106 funding between local authority areas was detailed in the preparation of Statement of Common Ground. On the face of that, to me, and I think the Cabinet member responsible, that seems like a sensible measure. 106 is something that we need to keep a careful eye on and need to cooperate with better with local authorities around us. Yes, Councillor Webb.
Thank you, Chair. Welcome this as a statement of common ground. It gives us an opportunity with cross-border arrangements to work with health and CCG colleagues with regard to their integrated care system and looking at health centres based in communities. So if we have communities that are cross-border, if the development is across the border, it will give the opportunity to develop health centres, community facilities that could be used by the community, not necessarily the city or the outside of city local authority, so that we would all benefit. Because at the moment, although housing developments bolted onto the city use city facilities, in future, this would give the opportunity for that housing development outside of the city to literally give communities within the city an advantage in getting additional facilities that would be outside the city boundaries. So fair exchange, and it would be common ground. It would also link with health and community facilities.
Yeah, we've recently attended a housing market area meeting. It was actually very positive. We're kicking off the next phase, and this is part of that. I think we all recognise that the local plan process, although there was a duty to cooperate, actually I think it didn't work in the way that the government intended it to, really. I think it was very weak. I remember sitting in I can't remember what it was, which development of many, in front of the inspector, and arguing actually that I didn't believe that there had been full duty to cooperate, and I think that it was almost like just a line in the local plans to say, yeah, well, we've spoken about this, but actually it didn't have any weight to it, really. This will actually change that. I think that it forces local authorities not just to work together, but to actually detail and evidence that work. So there will be, moving forward via the HMA and other meetings and other policies, you know, meat to the bones in terms of where we're headed with the next round of housing supply and also other issues, and as Councillor Webb has just said. So I welcome this. I think it's going to be a step in the right direction. It's not going to be easy, because from our point of view, from Derby City's point of view, we're a city which has a tight boundary, and we've got obviously only so much we can do within that city boundary in terms of looking for housing sites now. So we are going to have to, you know, work very hard to get our neighbouring authorities to agree with us. You know what my view is, bolt-ons don't work. And so I'm very keen to ensure that via the HMA and other discussions that we're having is to build in a more sustainable way of developing our region for housing, and hopefully this will help in that aim, Chair.
Okay, can I just deal with the specific recommendation from Scrutiny Board? Are we content with that in relation to the section 106 to go forward? Okay, so I'll do it if you like. 2.2 is one of the recommendations. Excuse me. I think we need to highlight that this recommendation is a change to the current scheme of delegations in the system, but it is caveated by where there are significant financial implications. It'll be signed off, but it will come to Cabinet. Is that? So did you want to say anything else on that,
No.
Olive?
No, that reflects my thinking on it as well, Chair. And I was simply going to say that alternatively to go for a 2.3, which is to require the monitoring officer to make changes to the scheme of delegation to give effect to recommendation 2.2. I think that then covers it off.
If that dots the I's and crosses the T's, then I think we're content with that for additional recommendations. So with that caveat, can we agree recommendations 2.1 and 2.2? Agreed, thank you. So item 9 then is the revision of national non-domestic rates policy for the award of discretionary rate relief.
Yes, thank you, Chair. Thank you very much. Yeah, thank you, Chair. So the paper in front of Cabinet this evening is really a technical paper. The Council, like most local authorities, maintains a non-domestic rates policy for the award of discretionary rate relief, which basically means that local authorities can use their discretionary powers to reduce business rates for local business. The policy being changed tonight is largely a technical one in relation to the Infinity Park Enterprise Zone, and it's really about a clarification in which the date by which businesses that look to relocate onto that zone, that date has been extended to the 31st of March 2021. Previously that had been the 31st of March 2018. And crucially, there won't be any financial impact on the council for extending the existing scheme, because any changes are funded by the way of government grant as set out in paragraph 1.3. So it's largely a technical change, Chair, and the recommendation is that Cabinet approves that change. Thank you.
Thank you, and I think it's a change to be welcomed because it adds to the opportunity for businesses to develop onto this important site and helps them to do so. Any questions? Any? Yes.
I'm not quite sure. Are we still in the business rates retention pilot that was running, or is that finished? Because I was going to ask whether that has any, or this thing has any impact on that. But if that's, I didn't know whether we went into a second year of it.
No, we didn't get the second year of the business rates retention pilot, but the business rates for this area are go to the LEP anyway. Under the scheme of enterprise zone, the business rate is in relation to the LEP, so it's no financial difference to the council in this respect. Okay, any other questions? So we just have one recommendation there, and that is to approve the full revised DRR policy, which is on CMIS if you need to go through the full details. Can we agree that? Our Scrutiny Board did consider this paper and just resolved to note it. Yes. So, moving on then to item 10, which is the 1920 quarter one forecast outturns for a number of things. Again, you, Paul, yeah?
Yes, thank you, Chair. The paper in front of Cabinet this evening is the first financial monitoring report for the 2019-20 financial year, so the first quarter up until the end of June of this year. We are forecasting on our general fund an overspend of just shy of £6 million against our base budget of just under £221 million, which is about 2.6%. That is obviously a significant challenge for us. CLT has already put in place, or looking to put in place, in-year constraints to manage the risk of any overspend. I think it's important that Cabinet understand the implications for the Council's reserves, because due to the pressures elsewhere within the Council's resources, notably the challenge on the A52, we are looking to utilise some of our budget risk reserve to support the A52 and some of our general fund balances as well. So the impact of this could be significant in terms of reducing our general fund balances by the end of the year. The report clearly sets out some of the main reasons for that, and I don't intend to go into a huge amount of detail, Chair, but I'm sure Cabinet and other member colleagues are well aware of the pressures facing Derby, along with other local authorities, notably in children's and adult social care. I think it's also worth highlighting the particular challenge around the dedicated schools grant for Derby, which is set out on page 2 of the report. And we are predicting an overspend on the high needs block of the dedicated school grant. And that is going to be of a magnitude that means that we aren't going to be able to fund that from DSG balances. So we will have a deficit position of 1.2 million at the end of the financial year. And just yesterday at corporate leadership team, we talked about the recovery plan that needs to be put in place to help manage that. And we will be meeting with school colleagues following the school holidays to discuss how we can mitigate the risk of that situation, and obviously also talking to colleagues at DFE. So I think the main message I would want to convey, Chair, is we have a significant financial challenge. That challenge isn't going to go away without significant effort from officers and councillors clearly working together. But I think it's important that I do stress that clearly we aren't sitting on our hands, and we'll be putting in place mitigating actions to try and manage that overspend as best we can. The report does go obviously also to talk about the capital programme. We've got some slippage on that at the moment, and also the forecast use of reserves on the housing revenue account. That is in line with plan, so nothing to be alarmed about there. But yes, clearly the general fund position is a particular challenge. Happy to take any questions, Chair.
Thank you. I think it's fair to say we all do recognise, and this actually highlights the financial pressures on the council. You talked about the capital programme, saying we have some slippage there. In my view and Cabinet's view, there's significant slippage there, and certainly on our agenda to address that and to review that capital programme to understand where it's at and why it's been like that for a number of years now, and we don't want it to continue in that vein. So we'll be addressing that separately. Any questions? Yes, Councillor Shanker.
Thank you, Chair. I've got several points. In no particular order, I'll ask the capital question first, just because that's the topic we're talking about. It obviously looks like there's significant slippage, but the forecast still remains a spend of 166 million at this stage compared to a budget of 181. So just some sort of 15 million short. Obviously that contains the 25 million pounds for the new waste treatment facility in Sinfin. So in our current plans, are we forecasting to spend that 25 million in this next financial year?
No, the position is that was payable on completion of the certificate and the completion of the contract. That contract's no longer, so there's no prospect of that £25 million becoming payable.
That was my understanding. Then, personally, I don't think there's any way we're going to be at the 166 million for the year if that 25 isn't being spent. So the figure of 166 being forecasted, I'd suggest, isn't accurate.
That's a simple part of the equation. That can be taken out, can't it? At this point, this was the Q1 outturn, but it's part and parcel of what I just said to you in the terms of we need to review the whole capital programme to see that it's still accurate and up to date and fit for purpose.
Okay, fair enough, but I think it shouldn't be in that 166 figure, is my point.
Chair, yeah, absolutely. If I can just pick up on that. This report is for Q1, Baggy. So in relation to at this point in time, that was relevant at that point in time. And obviously that will be reviewed as and when things are progressing.
I'll move on to my second point, table 1. Again, I'm not sure if it's a typo, it's just me not understanding it. So we had a net approved budget of in February, when from the budget papers I've taken this figure, just over 220 million. Our new full year forecast is 225 million. But the second to bottom box on the table, it says original approved transfer to reserves. That surely should say original approved transfer from reserves, because we were taking just under 7.5 million out of reserves and not putting them into reserves. So my argument would be at that point we were actually forecasting an overspend of £7.5 million. And if that overspend now, including the transfer from reserves and not to reserves, of an additional 5.8, on the balance sheet, we're actually spending £12 million, or predicting to spend £12 million more this financial year than the available funding for this particular year. Is my
Can we ask
understanding
the
right?
officer or the cabinet member if they want to respond to that?
I think I think that's a fair comment, Chair. I think that the narrative normally would say original approved transfer to stroke from reserves. I think the word from is simply missing from the table.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Shanker, can I just say, I'll give you some latitude here, but this paper was scrutinised at exec scrutiny last night. The opportunity there was to ask these detailed questions. This is the cabinet meeting. I'll take a couple more, but we can't spend all night answering specific points. If there are other points, by all means, the cabinet member or the officer will be happy to iron those out for you. Okay.
Thank you. And if we then go to 4.19, it's the table for corporate reserves and the second line, corporate asterisks. It's got an approved budget of just over £10 million, and it says that actual spend. It says actual spend. I assume that's actual spend to date at £16 million. It's showing 192% in relation to the original budget. Yet it says year end we expect to be just over 7 million. Is there some technical adjustment happening there to pull that already spent 16 million back down to 7 million?
Apologies. Yeah, I believe there's an element here of the pension fund was highlighted there with the asterisks. We'll come back to you with the final clarification, but it's the understanding is potentially due to a 3-year element within that. But we'll come back to you, Councillor Shanker, with clarification if that's okay.
Thank you. And then finally, you'll be glad, at Appendix 1, the budget risk reserve showing an opening balance for the year at just shy of £24 million and a closing balance for the year of £5 million. It says commitments in 1920 of just over 18 million, but there's no details in the report what that 18 million has been.
Sorry, Baggy, our apologies, we couldn't hear you then very clearly.
Sorry, okay, I'll go again. So Appendix 1, the budget risk reserve under earmark reserves, opening balance for the year was just under 24 million. There's commitments for this year of 18 million, showing a closing balance for the year of 5.7. There's nowhere in the report I could find that 18.178 million detailed what it's being used for. I assume some of it's the overspend of 5.8, but I couldn't work out what the rest of that movement from the budget risk reserve is being used for.
Apologies, Baggy. I think we'll have to come meet with you on this one because having looked at Appendix 1, there, budget risk reserve.
Yep.
Yep. Would need to come back with some clarification.
Yes,
absolutely, yeah.
I think that's right, Chair, but I'm very happy to provide a full analysis of the use of the reserve to Councillor Shanker.
Okay, thank you. The exec scrutiny did look at this paper last night and resolved to note the paper. So any other questions? Any other clarifications? In that case, can we agree? How many recommendations are there? So there are recommendations 2.1 to 2.5. Can we agree those? Thank you. Item 11 then, the D2N2 Local Enterprise Partnership project call for bids. Yes, Catherine.
Thank you, Chair. This report seeks Cabinet's approval for us to respond to a call from the Local Enterprise Partnership for short-term and medium-term project proposals for capital projects. The short-term call is to enable them to fully spend their current Local Growth Fund programme by March 2021, and the medium-term call is for medium-term projects to enable them to build a pipeline in order to respond to future funding opportunities that may arise. We're working hard based on our economic strategy and city centre master plan to work up a robust set of bids from Derby City Council to respond to this call. The deadline is extremely tight. We were notified of this on the 17th of July and the deadline is next Friday, the 16th of August. Because of that, we are seeking Cabinet's approval to delegate authority for the finalisation of a list of bids and the final submission of proposals to give us full opportunity to develop the most robust set of projects that we might to respond to this opportunity.
Thank you. Clearly, very important opportunities, both very tight timelines to submit detailed bids, but that work is in process and whatever. Deal with Exec Scrutiny's recommendation from last night, because fortunately we've got Councillor Shanker here who put this forward. I think that the Scrutiny Board resolved to request that Cabinet add the Osmaston main works site to the approved list to D2N2 for short-term LGF projects and medium-term projects. Maggie, my understanding on this is that that scheme is an existing project of its own that's already bid into local growth fund monies. It's work in progress, and there's potentially some good progress on that coming, and so it doesn't really fit the criteria for adding into these two new pilot bids, or these two new rounds of bidding. But maybe, Catherine, you wanted to add to that?
I can do, yes. We have an existing local growth fund allocation under the first round of LGF for Access Osmaston, which is specifically for the Osmaston area and spend in that area. And attached to that are a set of outputs that we're committed to achieve for the local enterprise partnership. So in order to bid for any further monies for that, we'd have to promise additional outputs, which clearly will be difficult in that circumstance.
Yeah, if we can just come back on that, no points for guessing where the recommendation came from. But we did have a briefing with the service director responsible, and I think the Access Osmaston is a specific project for works to be done in and mainly around the site. I think the recommendation, or well, I know the recommendation was more about the actual main work sites, getting the old Nightingale work site back up into use for housing. And we were told when we had our briefing that is one of these shovel-ready, oven-ready projects that they're potentially looking for. So the main work sites rather than the access work site, the Osmaston Access project, the main work site could be included if the relevant cabinet member and directors thought fit to be. So this isn't about the works just to get to the site, it's about the actual site development itself. I think they're two different projects.
Yeah, I agree with that, Baggy. Yes, understand that. The what we'll need to do in putting project proposals forward for this round is clearly demonstrate what that money will buy for the LEP, and we already have the housing outputs built into our original local growth fund programme. So in order to lever any further money for Osmaston, albeit for works that aren't in the existing project, we would need to find additional outputs. We've already promised those housing outputs in the first project.
Just very briefly, Baggy, if we may, we are committed to the project. Hopefully we'll have some positive news moving forward. I want to assure you and your fellow councillors that we're working very hard to deliver exactly what you want and what we want in that area, including the housing. And that's our honest appraisal of the situation. It's not that we're not putting it in this. It falls with that. It's already in train outside of this process, and you've got a genuine commitment there from us to deliver it.
Item 12 is the annual report and review of performance 2018-19. Carol, you're the sponsor of this. Are you going to?
Thank you, Leader. This is the annual report and review of performance which comes to Cabinet around this time each year. We've changed the format of the report this year, and it's effectively in a PowerPoint slideshow, and that's enabled us to simplify the report and focus mainly on the headlines. The detailed report at the back actually sets out much more detail around performance, which goes through all of the various results. There's a summary and then a detailed set of figures against each of the actions or measures with a cross-reference and description as well.
Thank you. So any questions, comments? Very good. The exec scrutiny did look at this last night, and in relation to this, the exec scrutiny board resolved to request that the chair, and I think that's the chair of the exec scrutiny board, not this chair, ensures that areas of underperformance to the relevant are referred to the relevant scrutiny board chairs for inclusion on their annual scrutiny work programmes. So that's, we note that and agree with that, and I think that's a system that we've already been doing. So, okay. So are we're content with that recommendation and note that comment from the exec scrutiny board? Yeah. Now, apparently there's also a recommendation in relation to this from Audit and Accounts to recommend that Council Cabinet note the comments of the committee in relation to performance against agreed targets. Okay, what were the comments? Ollie, you tell us about the comments there. So, Ollie, can you tell us the comments that they had in relation to this? Okay. So from Audit and Accounts, it was stated that the performance against agreed targets was reported both to Council Cabinet and the Exec Scrutiny Board. It was further noted that the continuous improvement may not be achievable at a time of reducing resources, and the importance of setting realistic targets was emphasised. Yeah, I mean, it should be reported both to Council Cabinet and the Exec Scrutiny Board, and is as a matter of course, isn't it? In relation to resources shouldn't be an excuse for underperforming, and we need to find a way of reaching as many targets as we can, and we need to constantly review them and focus on them. But yes, we certainly note the comments of the Audit and Accounts Committee as well. Okay. So, in relation to that, there's one recommendation, and that is to approve the annual report and annual review of performance for publication. Are we okay with that?
Agreed.
Agreed. So, before we go any further, I need to read, I don't think it's relevant, but I need to read exclusion of press and public. So, we need to consider a resolution to exclude the press and public during consideration of the following item: that under section 100A of the Local Government Act 1972, the press and the public be excluded from the meeting during discussion of the following items on the grounds that they involve the likely disclosure of exempt information as defined in paragraph 3 of part 1 of schedule 12A of the Act, and that the public interest in maintaining the exemption outweighs the public interest in disclosing the information. So I have to ask if any members of the public and press would mind leaving.